Carol Burnett made America laugh for 11 straight years, but in 1977, she made her entire crew cry. One sketch, one performance. So powerful, it aired only once and left critics speechless. It won awards. It broke hearts. But Carol, she never watched it again. Not once in 47 years. Why? Because it was too real. Tonight, we're diving into the life of comedy's queen and the sketch that shattered her. April 26, 1933, San Antonio, Texas. The Great Depression still had its grip on America, and into this world walked a baby girl named Carol Burnett. From the very beginning, her life was steeped in instability. Her father, Jody, was a dreamer who worked in movie theaters, but he could never keep a job, not because he lacked ability, but because he was chained to the bottle. Her mother, Ina Louise, had writing ambitions, a sharp wit, and beauty, but she too drowned in alcohol. The Burnett household wasn't warm. It wasn't safe. It was unpredictable. For a toddler, home should be bedtime stories, hugs, and safety. For Carol, it was shouting, silence, and disappointment. By the time she was old enough to tie her shoes, she already knew what it felt like to be unwanted. The people who were supposed to protect her simply couldn't. Her parents chose liquor over love, and one day, they were gone. Not dead yet, that would come later, both to alcohol-related illness, but gone from Carol's childhood. The abandonment could have crushed her, but instead, it planted a seed. If the world wasn't going to give her love, maybe she could earn it with laughter. It was the first spark of a survival instinct that would define her life. When her parents gave up, one person stepped forward. Her maternal grandmother, Mabel White. Mabel didn't have much. She didn't have money. She didn't have status, but she had heart. In 1940, the two of them packed up their fragile belongings and headed west to Hollywood. Not the Hollywood of movie premieres and palm trees, but the forgotten side. A rundown boarding house filled with lost souls. They shared one tiny room. The wallpaper was peeling. The hallways smelled of stale smoke and desperation. Their neighbors were addicts, drifters, and mentally ill tenants, people barely holding on. Carol and Mabel survived on just $20 a week. That's less than $4 a day for food, clothes, everything. They were so poor that stealing toilet paper from public bathrooms wasn't scandalous. It was necessary. But amid that bleakness, Carol had something she'd never had before: unconditional love. Mabel adored her, protected her, made her feel for the first time safe. And with that safety came creativity. Carol began building escapes inside her imagination. Her most famous? A twin sister named Karen. Karen wasn't real, but Carol made her real. She was everything Carol wished she could be. Confident, glamorous, unstoppable. Carol went so far as to perform the role of Karen for other tenants in the boarding house. She'd run up the fire escape, change her outfit, switch her hair, and re-enter as the bold, radiant Karen. Then she'd slip away and come back as shy little Carol again. The fact that broken, weary adults believed Karen existed, that says everything. Carol didn't just create a character. She gave those people, and herself, a reason to smile in a place where hope was scarce. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. Not just imagination, not just escape, but training. Training for the stage. Training for the characters that would one day captivate millions. Even in poverty, even in the darkness, Carol was sharpening her gift. Her fantasy world was more than playtime. It was survival. It was the first draft of her destiny. Life in the dingy Hollywood boarding house was grim. The walls whispered with arguments. The halls smelled of gin and cigarettes. But every Saturday, young Carol and her grandmother Mabel escaped. They didn't have much, but they always saved a quarter. The price of admission to the movies. A quarter was more than 10% of their weekly income. But for them, it wasn't a luxury, it was survival. The moment the theater lights dimmed, the world transformed. Gene Kelly danced across the screen. Judy Garland belted out songs that shook the rafters. Greta Garbo captivated with a single glance. For a few hours, Carol wasn't a hungry girl living in a rundown building. She was transported into a universe of sparkle, wit, and possibility. And she studied every detail. How the stars moved, how they spoke, how they held an audience. Then came the moment that changed everything. Johnny Weissmuller, the iconic Tarzan, let out his legendary jungle yell. That primal cry echoed through the theater and straight into Carol's soul. Back at home, she tried to imitate it, over and over. Her grandmother would laugh until she cried. Carol would refine it, push it, strengthen her lungs and diaphragm. It wasn't just a silly party trick. She was unknowingly developing one of her trademarks, the ability to control her voice with precision, volume, and comedic timing. That Tarzan yell would follow her for decades. From talent shows to television specials, it became a signal, the sound of a survivor who had turned her pain into play. Movies gave her escape. The Tarzan yell gave her power. And comedy? Comedy gave her identity. Carol Burnett had discovered her voice, and the world was about to hear it. By high school, Carol was smart, quick-witted, and still painfully shy. She buried her dreams under practicality. Her mother had once wanted to be a writer. So Carol decided she'd study journalism. It was safe, respectable, a way to honor her mother's unrealized ambitions. When she applied to UCLA, she faced a crushing reality. Tuition was $50. That might as well have been $5,000. But fate doesn't always reveal itself with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Out of nowhere, a mysterious benefactor, someone Carol never identified, stepped in and paid her tuition. No explanation, no demands, just a chance. That single act of generosity cracked her world wide open. At UCLA, Carol started as a journalism student, but one elective theater class changed everything. She stepped on stage, script in hand. The shy girl vanished. In her place stood someone fearless, someone hilarious, someone magnetic. The audience roared with laughter. Her professors lit up with praise. Her classmates whispered, "She's got it." And for the first time in her life, Carol realized she wasn't just funny in her imagination. She was funny on stage, funny in front of strangers, funny in a way that could move people. She switched her major to theater arts, a terrifying gamble, but the right one. By the end of her first year, she was named Most Promising Newcomer. Not just a flattering title, a foreshadowing. Still, Carol didn't know how she would survive. How would she ever get from a college campus to the bright lights of New York or Hollywood? Dreams didn't pay rent. Dreams didn't buy dinner. And then, something miraculous happened. One night, while working at a small theater, Carol met a wealthy man and his wife. They were struck by her talent and her honesty. So much so, they did something almost unthinkable. They handed Carol and her boyfriend $1,000 each, a fortune in the 1950s, with one condition. "When you're successful," the man said, "don't pay us back. Help someone else instead." That gift launched Carol Burnett to New York City. It was the bridge from obscurity to opportunity, from a boarding house girl to a Broadway dreamer. A stranger's generosity turned the tide of her life, and in true Carol fashion, she never forgot it. New York City, the early 1950s. Carol Burnett arrived with a suitcase, a dream, and barely enough money to eat. The streets were alive with possibility and danger. Broadway lights dazzled, but for every star, there were 1,000 broken dreams. Carol knew the odds. Still, she hustled. She auditioned anywhere, everywhere. Sometimes she was laughed at, sometimes ignored, sometimes told she wasn't pretty enough or sophisticated enough. But rejection never stopped her. Instead, she leaned into the very thing that set her apart, her ability to make people laugh. Her first big break came in the most unexpected place, television. In 1959, she joined The Gary Moore Show. Week after week, she stole scenes with her characters. Audiences couldn't get enough. Her goofy faces, her rubbery voice, her ability to flip from heartbreak to hilarity in a single beat. She was a revelation, and in 1962, that performance earned her the ultimate recognition, her very first Emmy Award. But Carol wasn't satisfied. She didn't just want to be the funny sidekick. She wanted her own show. At the time, the idea of a woman leading a comedy variety show was almost laughable, at least to the men in charge. Executives told her, "No one will watch a woman hosting variety." Carol didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply reminded them of a clause in her CBS contract, a clause she had insisted on. If she ever wanted to create a variety show, the network was obligated to put it on the air. It was a bold move, a gamble that most performers would never have dared. But Carol played her card, and in 1967, The Carol Burnett Show was born. For 11 years, it became a cultural landmark. Every week, millions tuned in to see Carol and her team, Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, Vicki Lawrence, Lyle Waggoner, break new ground in comedy. Sketches like Went with the Wind and The Family weren't just funny, they were iconic, timeless, and through it all, Carol's warmth shined. Unlike other hosts, she ended every show by tugging her ear, a secret signal to her grandmother Mabel, the woman who had believed in her when no one else did. It was Carol's way of saying, "This is for you." From a little girl in a boarding house to the queen of variety television, Carol Burnett had defied the impossible. But success doesn't erase pain. And behind the curtain, her personal life was about to test her more than Hollywood ever could. Carol Burnett made America laugh, but offstage, her own life was filled with tears. Her second husband, Joe Hamilton, wasn't just her partner in life. He was also the producer of The Carol Burnett Show. Together, they built an empire and a family. 3 daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin. But the spotlight can cast long shadows. Behind the glitz of Hollywood, their marriage began to crumble. The show's pressure, the fame, the endless hours. By 1984, Carol and Joe divorced, leaving Carol to navigate heartbreak while still carrying the weight of being a single mom. And then came the fight of her life, her eldest daughter, Carrie Hamilton. Carrie was brilliant, fierce, talented, but by just 13 years old, she had spiraled into addiction, cocaine, pills, alcohol. For most parents, it would have been impossible. For Carol, it was war. She dragged her daughter to rehab after rehab. She endured screaming fights. She endured slammed doors. She endured her daughter's hatred, but she refused to give up. Carol once said, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you." And that's exactly what she did. By 17, Carrie was clean, sober, and stronger than ever. She became an actress in her own right, starring in Fame and working alongside her mother on stage projects. For the first time, it felt like victory. The storm had passed. Mother and daughter were bonded tighter than ever. Then, tragedy struck again. In 2001, Carrie was diagnosed with lung cancer. It spread to her brain. Doctors gave her little time. Carol put everything on hold. She never left her daughter's side. They laughed through the pain. They held each other through the terror. On January 20th, 2002, Carrie Hamilton died. She was just 38 years old. For Carol, the loss was shattering. Poverty had never broken her. Hollywood rejection had never stopped her. But losing Carrie, that wound never healed. Yet even in her darkest moment, Carol carried forward. She finished Hollywood Arms, the play she had begun writing with Carrie. When it opened on Broadway later that year, Carol said, "I owed it to Carrie." She turned grief into legacy. And even as time passed, Carol's battles weren't over. Her youngest daughter, Erin, fought her own decades-long struggle with addiction. In 2020, when Erin could no longer care for her son Dylan, Carol, at 87 years old, stepped in. She and her husband Brian Miller became guardians, once again proving Carol would sacrifice everything to protect her family. Behind the legend was a mother, scarred but unshaken. A woman who fought for her children with every ounce of strength she had. For most stars, a career like Carol Burnett's would have ended in the 1970s. But Carol? She just kept rewriting her story. Even in her 60s, she shocked audiences by taking on roles in modern TV hits. On Mad About You, she played Helen Hunt's mother. Funny, sharp, and painfully real. That role earned her an Emmy Award in 1997, proof that she could thrive in any era. Then came a new challenge, animation. Her voice, that unmistakable mix of warmth and wit, lit up movies like The Trumpet of the Swan, 2001, and Horton Hears a Who, 2008, introducing her to kids who had never even heard of The Carol Burnett Show. But Carol wasn't done. At nearly 90 years old, she stunned the world again. In 2022, she joined the cast of Better Call Saul, playing a sweet, elderly woman named Marion. At first, she seemed harmless, but in a single chilling scene, her quiet suspicion unraveled Saul Goodman's entire cover. The performance was so raw, so sharp, that even co-creator Vince Gilligan admitted, "It felt awful writing a scene where Saul even considered hurting Carol Burnett's character. She's an American treasure." But Carol wasn't playing Carol. She was playing a woman who outsmarted one of TV's greatest anti-heroes, and she nailed it. Then came Palm Royale in 2024 on Apple TV+. At 91 years old, Carol played a wealthy socialite who slips in and out of a coma, a role that demanded both physical comedy and emotional nuance. She improvised gibberish dialogue, turned mishaps into laughs, and delivered a performance that earned her a nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series. At 91, she became the oldest woman ever nominated in that category. Think about that. While most stars fade into reruns, Carol Burnett was still reinventing herself, 7 decades after she first dreamed of Broadway. Her career isn't just about laughter, it's about survival, reinvention, and proving over and over that age, tragedy, and setbacks can never silence true talent. If this story moved you, imagine how many more legends have tales just as powerful waiting to be told. So don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and join us as we uncover the stories behind Hollywood's brightest and bravest stars. Because here, it's never just about fame. It's about the fight, the heartbreak, the resilience, and the legacy. And if Carol Burnett taught us anything, it's that laughter is how we survive.